Hello, everyone. We are recording a brief video featuring some of the authors on a manuscript titled Envisioning the Future of Queer of Color Critique in Higher Education, Mobilizing the Framework in Research. My name is Antonio Duran. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am an assistant professor in the higher and post-secondary education program at Arizona State University. And today I am joined with two other fabulous co-authors of this manuscript, with the third one being here in spirit, Romeo Jackson. But at this point, I will let the second co-author introduce themselves. And Q, take it away.
Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Courtney Hutchings. I usually go by Q. Pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm an assistant professor of higher education at Northern Illinois University. And so super excited here to share a little bit more about our article and our work. And then I'm going to turn it over to Reggie, Dr. Blockett, to share and introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Q and Antonio. Yes, my name is Reggie Blockett, open and flexible pronouns, and I'm an assistant professor at Auburn University in Higher Education Administration program. I'm really excited about this work and very grateful for our other two co-authors, all of our co-authors, but especially Romeo and Q for kind of spearheading and taking on this work. I thought I would start by maybe asking you a first question, Antonio. So why did we choose the Journal of Critical Scholarship and on Higher Education and Student Affairs for this article?
Yeah, good question, Reggie. So I have long been an admirer of JCSHESA for sure, the Journal of Critical Scholarship on Higher Ed and Student Affairs. I actually used to serve as a reviewer for the journal when I was a graduate student, and have since gone on to continue reviewing for the journal, as well as serving as one of the advisory board members. And so I remember when we were having conversations around where this particular manuscript could go, JCSHESA certainly really popped up in our minds and really stood out because it is, one, an incredible way to support a graduate student run journal that really features some cutting edge scholarship. And two, as evident by the name, it features scholarship, empirical pieces, conceptual pieces that utilize critical frameworks to really challenge us in higher ed and student affairs to think about how is it that we can engage in equitable practices, both in scholarship and practice. And because of that scope, we have long admired JCSHESA's work and what has been present in the journal. So as we were developing this manuscript that is all to do around how does one mobilize this critically oriented framework, queer of color critique in higher ed, JCSHESA stood out for those reasons. We thought it would be a nice home, a nice venue to be able to think through some of these quandaries around what it means to mobilize queer of color critique in research, and how can people do it in ways that are, equitable, in ways that honor the framework. And so there was a nice, parallel, there was a nice alignment between the arguments that we were making in this manuscript and the journal scope, which always made it seem like a really good partnership. And we got great feedback along the way, great reviewers who were able to think alongside us and really challenge us to think about how is it that this work would be at its strongest. And so for all those reasons, JCSHESA really seemed like a natural venue for the manuscript. Curious if any of you have anything else to add with in terms of your perspectives on JCSHESA, the work that's published there, or why we chose to publish in it. If not, we can move on to another question. And in particular, I think for this one, I'll first open it up to Q and Reggie, if you have anything else, things you want to add. But my question is, as we were writing this article, how do you feel like this manuscript reflects your identity as a critical scholar?
Yeah, so I think kind of the sharing a little bit about my identity as a critical scholar. I'm also an Loyola alum, and so and also was a editorial board member in JCSHESA as well. And so there's pieces of not only the journal, but then also the connections to things around reflection and discernment, and different pieces that I think really has been really important to me, not only as parts of the journal scope, but also to me as a critical scholar. And I think as someone who identifies as a Black, queer, non-binary person, and my critical scholarship also is very much integrated into my lived experience. And I think in a lot of ways, this article really reflects those different pieces that queer color critique talks about and discusses, particularly around things around my experiences with racialized heteronormativity, and ways that I've seen this work not only in my research, but then also my lived experiences as well. The thing that I've also thought about a lot is, particularly in this article, we talk a lot about some of these guiding questions that researchers really need to think about, particularly in mobilizing and using actualizing queer color critique. And so we talk about things particularly around like, how do scholars maintain an attention to anti-Blackness and racial things specificity? And I think that that is something that, to me as a scholar, is really important to look at this lens when we're talking about people's racialized experiences, and thinking about it not in such a voyeuristic way, but also ways that we can also integrate our own thoughts and our epistemology frameworks and pieces in when we do this work. And I think it's also really super important for us to do reflections as a researcher, and thinking about who can engage in queer and color critique, and particularly how does research particularly immerse themselves and consider themselves as a part of the study. And I think for me as a critical scholar, or at least in some ways I try to integrate criticality in my scholarship, it is really ways that how am I very much investing in people's lives in a way that manifests, that honors their as a participant. So using things like their experiences, not only humanizing their experiences, but also thinking about the ways that we can honor their stories and really elevate and enhance their stories in a way that is not cannot be harmful, because we also don't want things to stay into like this academic paywall. And I think particularly within queer color critique, there's so many different ways that we can humanize people's lived experiences in the way that we do research, and that's something that I really want to continue to do. And so some of the questions we've asked in our papers, like how do we wrestle with the stories of the participants or collaborators? How do research practice? How do we practice care? And I would say care and critical love in people's narratives. And, what are some ways that we're also talking about some of these larger pieces around academic capitalism and things around historical materialism that Ferguson's work talks about. And so those are some of the things I can kind of go on and be a long soapbox, but I'm going to also stop and also get space for other folks to share as well. But I think what we'll do is kind of, transition a little bit on, and I'll ask also Reggie, what are some challenges that you may face in publishing like critical scholarship, and share some of your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of things come to mind when I think about publishing critical scholarship. I think before getting to the publication phase, I see some of the tensions that arrive in just trying to conduct critical scholarship, trying to get certain critical scholarships like work that we do around queer color critique move through an IRB, right? Or trying to figure out what are the best protocols and approaches in terms of how we actually kind of conduct this work. I've experienced my own, pushback, backlash from, senior researchers and things like that who, have questioned my techniques in terms of my research process, or question my techniques in terms of my methodology. It reminds me of, the section of our article where we're talking about sort of the importance of sort of how the researcher and research participant sort of both show up in that relationship. How do we sort of, make a fine balance of not making our studies completely kind of self-absorbed about our own experiences, but really doing our best to sort of attend to the needs of participants. How do we make sure that we're in relation with participants? So this question about publishing is important, but I think even before we get into the publication process, just trying to actually get through the research process sometimes can be a little prickly for us. Um, Particularly related to publication, though, when it comes to critical scholarship, we have to find venues like this venue that are appropriate, that sort of fit the narrative for what we're looking to get our research published in. I've found spaces that sort of call for critical scholarship or call for critical research to be places that are more fitting. I've had my fair share of, again, bumps in the road when it comes to trying to get critical scholarship published in places that are maybe at times considered more mainstream journal article or journal venues. So I think there's some different challenges that come along with it. I'll hark back to the article again for a second and just say that I hope that doc students or early career researchers who might be watching this or wanting to take a look at this really kind of tune into that portion of the article where we're talking about the necessity to sort of dilapidate that research participant sort of dichotomy and think about how we might more seamlessly sort of create intrinsic places for us to sort of collaborate with our research participants. So my 2 cents there.
Yeah, I love that. And well, and Reggie, as you were talking about, envisioning early career scholars, doc students reading the manuscript, I think that gets to maybe kind of our final point of, who we are hoping reads the work, right? And, I think in writing, the impetus behind writing this article was when we were starting to really dig deep into queer of color critique as a framework, as a body of knowledge. I think we all shared some similarities of, seeing a lot of potential, but also maybe feeling a little lost in how we actually can mobilize and honor it in our scholarship, right? And so part of us writing this manuscript is with the hopes of people who are starting out to engage with queer of color critique can have some guidance, some pre-established ways of potentially thinking about mobilizing queer of color critique in scholarship, recognizing that what we wrote, right, is not the end all be all. And in fact, we hope that others who are reading the work critically engage with us, maybe challenge, extend our ways of thinking. We are so excited about the potential for that. We also write about in the manuscript of, how who should engage with queer of color critique as a framework, right? And if there are any concerns around, non-Black people of color engaging with the framework, if there are things we can think about when it comes to white researchers who are hoping to be responsive to queer of color critique's concerns. And so we write about that a little bit in the article, but I think it will be really interesting to see as people read the article and engage with it, to see, even if you don't necessarily mobilize queer of color critique, how can you still be responsive to the concerns of queer of color critique? How can we, identify, wrestle with, challenge anti-Blackness in queer and trans research, right? How do we think about, racism, capitalism, those intersections as it relates to our queer and trans studies and education? Like, these are all the kinds of questions that we're hoping this article sparks for those reading, regardless of where they fall in terms of identity lines. The imperative to do this work is still very much so there. Curious if any of you all have anything to add when it comes to that.
Yeah, I would just say, I definitely echo that perspective, Antonio. And I would say, be on the lookout for other works that we also have right in the pipeline around the same topic. That this piece is really kind of attending to research and the impetus for sort of how we engage this work in our research practices. But we know that queer of color critique is sort of a theory that comes, from the people, out of the, from the ground up, right? And from communities. And so thinking about how this applies to praxis as well, how this applies to folks who are doing on the groundwork, whether it's in a LGBTQ resource center or a, cultural center, or if it's folks who are working in community-based agencies, just thinking about the necessity to maintain those frameworks and those structures from queer of color critique and all the work we're doing, whether it's as researchers or practitioners as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think about is when I think about queer color critique is that it very much just challenges systems and norms. And I think given a lot of ways of how research has also expanded their understanding of how the way we do working with people and communities and systems and all those different pieces. My hope is that this implores a lot of a lot of scholars, like young scholars, critical scholars, even, folks who have been seasoned, and even emerging scholars, to really use these type of critical lenses to really pushing back some of these like normative ways of how we understand traditional notions of research. And so I think that's more so just a like kind of call to action, or like a kind of a call to intention to think about ways that you also can implement some of the ways that we talk about queer color critique from a research lens, and some other spaces that also speaks to the people that are also here listening to us chat today.
Love that. Love that. Well, thank you so much for both of you for your comments today, but also deeply embedded to you all just in general, and as well as Romeo Jackson, who was a fourth author on this manuscript, deeply indebted to them as well. But thank you all so much for engaging with us, for watching this video. We are looking forward to seeing what you all think about the manuscript itself. Really, we welcome any and all feedback, thoughts, critical pieces of engagement, and we hope that you all enjoy and have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.
Take care, y'all.